Hello and good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Abdul Rahman, third year PGR in psychiatry, and today I would be talking about the pathophysiology of depression. Why is my serotonin so low? The underlying mechanisms in major depressive disorder. First of all, let's look at the learning objectives of today's presentation. So first of all, these are the two cardinal or core symptoms of depression. If you don't have one of these, then you cannot label a patient with major depressive disorder, at least according to DSM criteria. So first of all, there is depressed mood. And this is not some temporary depressed mood. This is depressed mood that lasts for most of the day, nearly every day. It is like a cloud overhanging over the head of the patient. Patient feels very depressed and it is completely unresponsive to happy events. Then this gentleman is trying to enjoy a movie, but as you can see, he is unable to enjoy it. This is anhedonia or loss of interest. Patient loses interest in the daily activities of his life, in the hobbies that he previously used to enjoy. And again, this should be present most of the day, nearly every day. Then these are the cardinal symptoms. After that, there can be fatigue or loss of energy, even when they haven't done so much work or when they have rested. Even after that, they feel fatigue and loss of energy throughout the day. Appetite can be reduced or it can be increased, and sleep can be reduced and increased similarly. Finally, there can be psychomotor agitation or retardation. Now, these are the so-called somatic symptoms of depression. Now, usually what happens in depression is that appetite and sleep are reduced. However, there is an entity called atypical depression. In this sort of depression, both appetite and sleep is increased. However, even though they have increased sleep, they have extreme fatigue when they wake up. And this extreme fatigue is called leaden paralysis. So these three are main symptoms in atypical depression: increased appetite, increased sleep, and leaden paralysis. So as Dr. Naab pointed out, there can be guilt or worthlessness. There are many cognitive symptoms in depression. Many patients of depression would complain of memory problems. However, it has been said that these are not true memory problems or true cognitive deficits. These are only because the patient is unable to focus on the task at hand, and so memory is not encoded. However, as we will see later, there are some changes in the brain areas associated with memory in patients with depression, and those might be responsible for these cognitive symptoms as well. Finally, to be a safe psychiatrist, you have to prevent this. Suicidal thoughts, plans, and attempts are common in major depressive disorder, and we have to screen all patients, particularly with severe major depressive disorder, for these suicidal thoughts, and we have to elicit any plan or attempt opposed to depression. So first of all, as we saw, genetics have a role. There are certain studies that study a large number of populations to find out the exact genes associated with multifactorial disorders like depression, like schizophrenia. So these are genome-wide association studies. And in case of depression, they have identified a single gene called SIRT1. This is the serotonin-1 gene, and it is involved in mitochondrial function and cell survival. And there are polymorphisms of this gene in many patients of depression. So as we discussed, adverse childhood experiences can predispose a person to develop depression, particularly parental separation early in life, and physical or sexual abuse can predispose a person to depression. Now, current life events, particularly the loss events, where you lose something. For instance, you can lose your job. You can lose a loved one. For instance, a breakup or a divorce, or you can have the death of a loved one. So all these loss events are particularly implicated in the pathophysiology of depression. Now, before they cause depression though, all these three events, genetics, adverse childhood experiences, and current events, they cause changes in neurotransmitters or receptors. These changes then lead to malfunction in specific brain circuits, and these brain circuits are responsible for all the mental functions of a normal human being. Once they are disturbed, then we have the symptoms of depression. So this is a normal synapse, and the neurons associated with mood also use this synapse. There is a presynaptic neuron and there is a postsynaptic neuron. The presynaptic neuron contains vesicles, and these vesicles are membrane-bound particles, and they contain certain neurotransmitters, for instance, serotonin. Once an action potential comes here, this neuron gets activated. It will then release this neurotransmitter into the synapse. After that, this postsynaptic membrane has certain receptors. The neurotransmitter would bind to these receptors and cause downstream effects. Finally, the action of the neurotransmitter is terminated by two primary mechanisms. In case of monoamine neurons, there is a transporter in the presynaptic neuron called the reuptake transporter. So they take the neurotransmitter from the synapse back into the presynaptic neuron. Then there are some enzymes known as monoamine oxidase A and B. These also cause breakdown of these neurotransmitters, and both of these mechanisms are responsible for reducing the action of neurotransmitter once it has been released into the synapse. So according to monoamine hypothesis, there is reduced monoamines in the synapse. As you can see, there are many molecules of neurotransmitter here in this first picture, and there are very few molecules of neurotransmitter in this second picture. Now, according to this hypothesis, antidepressants would act upon these monoamine neurotransmitters. They would increase their concentration in the synapse, and they would restore the function of these neurons. Now, there are certain studies called depletion studies. We can artificially deplete the brain of a person with monoamines. So what we do is we give a diet that is deficient in precursor to that monoamine. For instance, if we want to deplete serotonin, we give a diet deficient in tryptophan. So once they have reduced precursor, they will make less of serotonin and they will have a deficiency of serotonin. So when we do this experiment in a patient of major depressive disorder who is in remission but is not on medications, there is sudden temporary relapse of depression. If we do this to a non-depressed relative of a patient with MDD, who does not have MDD himself, this will cause some mild symptoms of depression in that person. So according to this model, this is what happens normally. So this is the normal monoamine synapse. Receptors are being activated by monoamines, and then it activates the DNA to produce certain proteins such as BDNF. And now this BDNF is watering the plants of the brain, the neurons, and it is causing their neurogenesis, increased growth. And this causes healthy hippocampal neurons. What happens in depression? Monoamines are reduced. The effect is reduced. There is reduced synthesis of BDNF, and there is atrophy and apoptosis of hippocampal neurons. Antidepressants reverse this action. They increase monoamines, the effect is increased, BDNF synthesis is increased, and finally the neurons and synapses regenerate. So first of all, we are looking at the synapse. This is the monoamine hypothesis of depression, that in this synapse, there is reduced concentration of monoamines. Then is the monoamine receptor hypothesis. In this postsynaptic membrane, the receptors are upregulated. Finally, we have this hypothesis that is concerned with downstream effects of these monoamines, the neurotrophic hypothesis, which implicates reduced function of what happens in depression. Now, this becomes chronically activated. Corticotropin releasing hormone activates ACTH. This activates glucocorticoids. Now, the problem is that feedback is impaired. Hippocampus and amygdala have atrophied. They are no longer contributing to the negative feedback. And hypothalamus itself becomes unresponsive to glucocorticoids, so that cortisol is elevated, the negative feedback loop is impaired. So this is a sagittal section of the brain. Three areas are implicated, which can atrophy in the patient with depression. First of all, the hippocampus. This is involved normally in memory formation and in the regulation of HP axis. This is the orbitofrontal cortex, the basal forebrain. It is associated with social and emotional behavior, and this atrophy of this area would impair these social and emotional behavior. Finally, the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the corpus callosum, which contains white matter fibers that connect the two hemispheres. Just above this is the cingulate gyrus. This is the cingulate cortex, and it is a part of the limbic system, which is involved in emotion. The anterior most part of this is the anterior cingulate cortex. This is very important for regulation of emotions, and it has been found that this is also atrophied in patients with the MDD, causing dysregulation of emotions. All right, this is how to see hippocampus in MRI. This is a coronal section. First of all, just a diagram. This medial temporal lobe is hippocampus. However, if you induce sadness, then this becomes overactivated. So this also shows that there are attention biases in depression. There are some cognitive distortions. You will only focus on the negative points of your everyday life. The sad things, they will become overactivated, and the happy, the positive things, they will do nothing. So that about sums up the presentation. He says, I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my happiness, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed, the earth seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the sky look you, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, no, nor woman neither. So basically, this paragraph is saying that this person has lost all his happiness, depressed mood, and he is not delighted by anything, which is anhedonia. Thank you so much for your patience. Any questions or comments are most welcome.
Dr. Abdul Wahab, मैं कहूँगी it's an excellent presentation by you as always. और मेरे ख्याल में इतने concepts आपने सबके clear किए हैं. इसके बाद तो कोई paper solve करना कोई problem नहीं रहेगी. I would suggest everyone to please आप इनसे share कीजिए ये slides. और everybody should learn these things. आपने बहुत अच्छा किया कि you were addressing the questions at the end.